It's now the early hours of the 11th of October 2021, and yesterday, the 10th of October, was World Mental Health Day. Technically, still is in the Americas. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about the subject. Um, it's something I've had personal experience of, as have many people. By the way, if you can hear knocking sound in the background, it's just my QQ site. I'm going to turn it off to QQ being a Chinese social media site. Makes that knocking sound when there's notifications. Anyway, good news is that mental health generally has been talked about a lot more in recent years. I would say roughly the last 10 years. And there's been a number of high profile advocates of this. One prominent example is Tyson Fury. I was listening to the Fury Wilder Free fight on radio last night. I couldn't directly see the fight. Apparently, it was a great heavyweight clash. Tyson Fury prevailed. Um, I could talk about boxing, but I want this to be as broad reaching as possible. So he's a public figure who's discussed his mental health battles, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, of course, and others. But I think it's good that the issue of mental health is in the public domain. I think it's good that it is far less taboo to talk about it today than it was in the past. Nevertheless, it is a complex issue, and mental health is really a catch-all. It involves a lot of things. Um, is there a risk that it could be overblown in the sense that sometimes people use it to evade responsibility? Maybe. Let's be honest about that. Maybe sometimes people will say, they'll kind of hide behind mental health problems to justify their own bad behavior or bad attitude about something. So I'm a believer in responsibility. I'm also a believer in compassion. And in approaching the subject, I sort of look at both. But we do know that suicide remains a major cause of death for men in Britain. I was going to say young men, but actually middle-aged men as well. And it's also something that impacts millions of people. I don't mean suicide, I mean mental health issues. So I feel it's important to be candid in my experience in order to sort of put this out there. And I don't feel any like, oh, this is private, I better not put it out there because I really don't think it is. But for me, it's not taboo. I mean, we talk about mental health stigma, and that's certainly an issue. I'll come to that in a minute. But let me just address some of my own things. I've been through clinical depression. Now, I can say that quite easily because I don't think it's taboo. I think it's fairly common. I don't know what the figures would be, i.e., people who have been clinically diagnosed or received medication for clinical depression, but I think it's fairly high. You know, it's certainly not a fringe thing. Now, this has actually led to some restrictions in my life. Earlier this year, I was in the process of applying to the Royal Navy Reserves, and I'd been in that process for about 5 months. I'd actually been going to training sessions, online, of course, because of COVID. I even went to my local unit, um, and I was really getting into the frame of mind that I could be, in the service. I was a reserve that wasn't the full-time Navy, so it would have been a secondary job anyway, but I was really in that frame of mind. I found the training sessions very interesting, and from the limited experience I had, the people I was with, i.e., the other people in that orientation group, they seemed, I got on well with them. There was no issues. But during that process, there was a medical phase, and it was very prolonged, something I'm still critical of. I'm not critical of the decision, but I'm critical of the prolonged way in which it was done. So the armed forces has a medical assessor, third party. They're independent from the armed forces, called Kappa. It's a big company. They handle other things as well. I think they do consultancy and a range of things. Anyway, um, they had the final decision on my medical situation. I had to answer questions about myself. Now, I'm in pretty good physical health. Uh, I've only been in hospital once or twice in my entire adult life. The last time was the end of last year for shingles. Um, kind of a irritating rash that you get if you had chickenpox as a child, you could get it as an adult. I also had hiccups at that time, but that was not the issue. They looked at the fact that I'd been diagnosed with clinical depression in 2016. That's 5 years ago. But I was. They looked at that and they just took the blanket decision that I couldn't be in the armed forces. Now, I've had a lot of time to think about this, and I understand the decision because the armed forces is a pressurizing, demanding job. Even in the reserve capacity, you could be handling weapons. You could be in a communal situation, away from home maybe for periods of time. It could be stressful. So I do understand actually the armed forces being precautious about that. But the fact it was prolonged was, I wish they just told me in the beginning because they knew from my phone triage that, well, this guy has had a history of depression. Sorry, you can't be in the armed forces. Rather than listening to that triage and then just waiting for my GP to respond. And it was this constant back and forth between my GP and Kappa. Now, I don't blame my GP because they've got a lot of other priorities, but I think Kappa prolonged it. For that reason, I'm very critical of them. And I'm not the only one. A lot of people feel that way. But I'm not bitter about the decision because looking back, you know, there's been periods where I've got into that depressive state of mind, not as bad as 2016, but bad enough. Um, and I sometimes think, well, could I have really done it? I think physically, and in terms of the things that you learn, I could have done that, but I don't know. Could I have done it? Could have handled the mental pressure. The armed forces is one area. I imagine this applies to the emergency services in general. Someone wanting to join the police or the fire service, there's mental health issues there. Nursing, anything to do with the NHS, and indeed politics. I mean, there's probably a lot of politicians either at council level or even elected MPs who might well have mental health struggles, but they might be reluctant to talk about it because they think that in the public mind that would be perceived as weakness. And if that's the case, that's really unfortunate because I think there is this unhealthy idea that if someone, for example, has had depression, then they're mentally unstable. But all it is that they've had a point where stress, the unhappiness, the mental anguish has just been too much at a particular time. Now, this has actually been quite a tough week for me, and I was in a bad state of mind last night. Nothing like nothing for people to worry about, but I'm just being candid here. I mean, I'm the sort of person. If people ask how I am, a lot of guys would be they like to say I'm fine, I'm fine. I don't do that actually. I'm honest. If someone asks how I am and I'm not feeling good, I say so. I do say so. But I appreciate it's not easy always for people to do that. So I think that's very, very important that when we take something like depression, it's important not to look at that in a sense of hyperbole, i.e., if someone has depression, it doesn't mean that they're unstable. It doesn't mean they're not capable of doing things. I've got a lot of achievements under my belt that I'm proud of, and I've worked on the other side of the world. Um, I entered a boxing ring for charity. Granted, there's a lot of things I haven't done I would have liked to do by now, but and a lot of that has been to do with distractions and sometimes mental health issues, well, the depression. Because one thing depression does, and anyone who's been through it will know what I'm talking about, it it totally hijacks your mental stability. I don't mean to say it makes you unstable, but it hijacks sort of a clarity of thinking. This is my experience. Um, I've struggled with mental anguish. I've struggled with to a lesser extent anxiety. That's not been a major issue for me, but it's been there. When I talk about mental anguish, I feel like I'm a passionate person. There's a lot of things I feel very strongly about, and sometimes I feel utterly powerless to do anything about them. I make these videos and I don't regret it. I think these videos serve a purpose, but if I'm being honest, there are times I feel deeply frustrated at problems in society that I want to see changed. It's not necessarily things that directly involve me, but I'm someone who does think about social politics. Recently, I've had a sort of change in circumstances which involves someone else, and I don't want to name that person or talk about them excessively. I want to respect their privacy. But let's just say I don't know. Um, I don't really know what the outcome of that situation will be, and it's to do with someone that matters to me. I don't want to go into more details in a public video, but this is just an example. Mental health issues, depression. Often it's to do with money. It might be to do with job stability, relationships, certainly. These are the sort of things that can trigger it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be those things, it could be something else. One thing I would say about mental health is we often hear it's important to be kind and compassionate. I think that's true, but I'm not so naive to believe that we're going to be in this nice utopian society where everyone's nice to each other. I mean, I have strong views about things. I strongly criticize people, and they might strongly criticize me. I don't know. Maybe in my channel or elsewhere, but uh, I don't think understanding mental health and being sympathetic to mental health issues is necessarily about being overly um, what's the word? Saccharine. I think that's the right word. Like overly sentimental and overly like let's just all hug each other. Certainly, I would never ever oppose more compassion in society. I think that's a very good thing. But, there's a lot of issues in this country right now. A lot of issues. And I know I'm not the only one that gets worked up by a lot of issues. Maybe more than I should. I have plenty of downtime as well. There's things I find very funny. There's things that I find are good to distract me. But I think when it comes to mental health, you have to do yourself a favor. What I mean by that is if you know what makes you happy, you need to go to that thing. It could be something simple like a particular song or a simple task. Now, I have quite a busy lifestyle and I get distracted by a lot of things, so that's not always possible. But I would like to do that more. I would like to do that more. And remember that if you have a shit day, the following day could be better. Or it might be the same and then the following day after that will be better. But honestly, I've had times in my life where I was more or less at rock bottom, and I thought there's no way out of this. And then good things came afterwards, unexpected. So never ever vilify the future, if I could put it that way. We just don't know. I mean, you might be able to predict the near future because you know, for example, about a scheduled event, but things can sometimes happen. So, for example, I could look at my rejection from the Royal Navy Reserves and I could feel very deflated about that. It was a big blow. I'm not going to lie. It was very, very disappointing when you dedicate yourself to something like that, and then you're just rejected. And it's a blunt rejection. That is hard. But I could say, well, okay, I'm not doing that. That's fine. It just gives me more time to do other things that I want to do because it means I don't have that commitment and I can commit to other things I want to do. I mean, I'm training to be a freelance journalist. It just means I've got more time to do that. It means I've got more time to write. I have more time for a lot of things. So, yes, it's disappointing. It'll probably take me some time to get over that. But often a disappointment in of itself will always be a disappointment. But looked at in a particular way, it could also provide opportunities. I mean, often the things that we're disappointed by involve some sort of responsibility. So it means that that responsibility is then gone in that sense. I mean, let's say a relationship ends. Well, you're going to be lonely, you're going to be unhappy, you're going to be maybe craving to be with that person again. But the independent time means that at least you can perhaps just build yourself and do things that you want to do, which don't mean an obligation to another person. But you know, this is not coming from an expert. That's just my sort of loose outlook on it. But everyone is different. People are complex. I mean, my experience of mental health issues is not going to be exactly the same as anyone else, and other people's is not going to be like mine. I mean, my goodness, there's almost 8 billion people in this world, and that's 8 billion minds. Whatever guilt or deflated feeling or anger we experience, we're never truly alone because a lot of other people go through these things. So, in that sense, I think it's important not to be too self aware in terms of how do people see me, because I think that could drive you crazy, especially if you're ambitious. And for me, one of the great complexities about me is I am very ambitious. So, in the long term scheme of things, I think, well, I need to get this stable, I need to do this right, I need to do that right. We have to live in the present. We have to see each day in its own merit. This is this day, and the future might be a great thing. And the past is what it is. But I think we need to look at each day in its own merit. I mean, that's something I'm going to try harder to do. It's not easy, but I'm going to try harder to do that. And, you know, I've been talking about depression, but mental health could cover other things like diagnosed conditions like perhaps schizophrenia. Things like that can sometimes be misunderstood, or at least there's a certain stereotype with them. So, for example, I know with schizophrenia, there's a stereotype that schizophrenic people are violent and unstable, but many of them are not. And there's many other examples. Um, Final thing I would say, if it's not a case that you're going through depression or you're going through a particular mental health issue, but you know someone who is, I don't want to give advice, but one thing I would say is by all means be there for them. Be a good friend, be a good girlfriend, boyfriend, brother, sister, but don't overwhelm them. because actually sometimes people have good intentions, but they can overwhelm the person. For example, if someone is very depressed, and then maybe with all the best will in the world, the friend or the relative sort of overwhelms them with attention and love, and that can actually make them feel very self-aware. So sometimes the best way is to be a little bit subtle about it, i.e., certainly make them understand that you're there for them and that you're a compassionate person to talk to. Um, and in the if you're in the UK and you do need to talk to someone, but you don't feel confident to talk to someone that you know, there's the Samaritans. They're a great charity. Basically, volunteers. They just listen to you. They don't pass judgment. They don't give advice, but they listen. And it's not that they solve problems, but simply having someone to talk to. I've always found it helpful. Um, and I would really, really recommend that. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. It's a six-digit number. I'll put a link to it in this video. But it's a free number, and that's very important because if you're very issued financial concerns, you might be fit. Oh, but what about the bill? That's what I used to think. But that's a free service. So sometimes you might have to wait because it's busy. But the volunteers are trained to just listen, and I personally have always found it helpful. Anyway, that's what I would say. Live each day in its own merit. Focus on the things that you enjoy. The things that make you upset or angry, they're not going to go away, but at least you can still focus on the things that you enjoy or try to. And that's just my honest experience. But I think that the good news is there is more focus on this. And with that, perhaps people have become more compassionate in some ways about the subject. And that's a good thing. That's something to welcome. Let me know your thoughts, and I hope you all keep well.